Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy, and I am so excited for our guest today. He is famed White House photographer Pete Souza. We will get to Pete in just a second, but first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Pete Souza. He was the chief official White House photographer for the entire tenure of the presidency of Barack Obama. He is the author of several books, including the #1 New York Times bestsellers Obama, An Intimate Portrait, and Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents. A photojournalist since the late 1970s, Pete was also an official White House photographer during the Reagan administration, a freelance photographer for Life and National Geographic, and the Washington-based national photographer for the Chicago Tribune. A documentary about his work at the White House, The Way I See It, was nominated for an Emmy, and its premiere was the highest-rated non-news, non-live program in MSNBC history. He is a professor emeritus at Ohio University's School of Visual Communication, and in 2021, Pete was inducted into the International Photography Hall of Fame. Pete, welcome into the back room.
Great to be here.
So I want to start with the old days. I always like to peel back the onion a bit, go back to childhood, learn about who you were as a child, how that may or may not have shaped who you became as an adult in your career. I see that you were born and raised in Massachusetts, where I'm actually going in about an hour to see my daughter, who lives outside of Boston, about 20 minutes. And your dad was a boat mechanic and your mom was a nurse.
That's right. Yeah. I was a insecure kid who loved sports, but was just never any good at it. So I went to college with the hopes of becoming a sports writer, and eventually took a photography class my junior year, and that was it. I was hooked during that first class. Probably the first print that I ever made, in the darkroom. As soon as I saw that come up in the tray in the darkroom under those red safe lights, I was like, this is what I want to do.
So there was no photography in your childhood, either on your own or like your parents? Were they photography buffs?
Well, we have a few, Polaroids that my dad and mom took of us. They're not a whole lot. That was sort of standard, I think, back in the 60s. I mean, the one thing that, in retrospect, that I now realize is that the still photograph spoke to me as a kid. I didn't ever think that, oh, I can do that. It's just that it struck me. I mean, I was 8 when Kennedy was assassinated, and the next day's newspaper had that famous picture of LBJ being sworn in on the front page, and then later that weekend, the picture of John saluting at the funeral. I watched I watched Ruby shoot Oswald live on TV, and I didn't see it. I was watching it.
Right.
The announcer said what happened, and you didn't really see it. And then the next day in the newspaper, there was that famous picture of Ruby shooting Oswald by this guy, Bob Jackson. And it was stunned me that I had just watched this live the day before, didn't see what this photograph, captured. And the photographs that I've just mentioned, I cut out of the newspaper, scissor cut them, and taped them to my bedroom closet door. So at 8 years old, I curated my first photo gallery. And I remember that very distinctly, but it wasn't like, okay, I can do this. It was, what was it? 12 years later when I took that photography class.
That's fascinating. And it does indicate that there was a seed that was planted.
There was a seed.
And photographs spoke to you in a way that clearly they don't speak to other 8 or 9 year olds. I've read somewhere that you, or maybe it was in your documentary, that the photographs meant so much to you because it was just like freezing a moment in time. Like once you shot something, that's it. It stays that way forever.
Well, and there, a few years ago, I'm friends with this band, the Lumineers,
Mm-hmm.
and they had just finished their Bright Side album. And Wes, the lead singer, sent me MP3 of the new album before it came out, and I listened to it driving in the upper Michigan, and there was, I'm listening to it as I'm driving 60 miles an hour, and this song comes on, and I'm kind of listening to it, and all of a sudden the lyric goes, "If the photograph could bring you back." And I almost drove off the road because it was like, that is the way I think of photographs. I see one of my photographs and I can go back, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, and I can remember the circumstances of making that photograph, what I was feeling, what happened before, what happened after. So, I think the seed, as you say, started when I was 8 years old.
Did you have any early inspirations in those early years, or did you start looking at and thinking about other photographers and being inspired by them at around the same time in college when you started to get the bug to shoot yourself?
I can't remember if it was the photo 1 class or the photo 2 class. The professor asked us to write down the photographers that inspired us, and I didn't know any. I ended up writing down Frank O'Brien, who was the sports photographer for the Boston Globe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like sort of the only byline I ever looked at, like, because his sports pictures were just phenomenal. I'd watch a game, and every day in the next paper, he'd have the picture of the big play, whether it was a football game, baseball game. And so, but that question that the teacher posed to us made me realize I had a lot of homework to do. And I think I purchased a whole Time Life had put out a series on photography. It's like an 8 or 10 volume series. And it had Walker Evans and Ernest Haas and Dorothy Lang and W. Eugene Smith. And that's where I sort of learned about the past photographers. Those books were instrumental to me in starting out.
And sports photography is like a whole other thing to itself, right? With speed and different aperture levels and all that. Like to capture a moving image the way these guys do. I mean, it's like next level kind of photography in some way.
Well, especially in the 70s.
Right.
Right? Because there was no such thing as autofocus.
Right.
So you had to do this thing called follow focus, where you're, as the subject, the football player, a baseball player, as they're moving, you're having to not only know when to click the shutter, but you having the focus to keep up with the player that's moving, really fast. So it was, really a challenge. And with sports photography, of course, subscribe to, I think, both the Sporting News and Sports Illustrated. Mm-hmm. And, some of the Sports Illustrated photographers were like phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Walter Yost, Neil Leifer, John Zimmerman, just amazing sports photographers. Matter of fact, I just saw Neil Leifer this past week. He was at this photo festival that I was at. And, he has the classic pictures of Muhammad Ali. Mm-hmm. Even when he was Cassius Clay, Neil was covering those great boxing matches. He covered football, I think, starting when he was 17 or 18.
And you mentioned boxing. It was always amazing to me how a photographer can capture the point of impact where the sweat is like bouncing off of somebody's head. Right. I find that absolutely incredible. And like you say, back then, when the technology wasn't what it is today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so you studied communications and journalism. Never had a bug to like just be a journalist. I know your early jobs in Kansas and in Chicago were photography related, but was there ever a thought where you just wanted to be a reporter, a writer versus a photographer?
Writing is really hard for me. I was actually up early today writing an essay, and it's hard. Photography to me was more fun than writing. Sometimes more frustrating. Photography can be frustrating, but writing was just it was really hard for me. And I did do some writing when I was in grad school. I had a column for the school paper, and oftentimes when I would do a project for the newspapers in Kansas, when I say a project, I mean you get daily assignments, but I was trying to do some photo stories. Did one on a daycare teacher. I did one on a boxing coach and guy who was boxing. I did one on a deaf child in small town Chinook, Kansas. So when I was doing those extended like photo stories, I would also write the text for those. But the writing was always hard. And it's funny because like when I published my photo books on President Obama, I actually did a lot of writing. I think I did 10,000 words in the first book, writing extended captions and, but I had an editor and that helped.
Well, yeah, you can't underestimate the value of an editor.
No, exactly. In terms of helping me polish my prose, if you will.
Well, I think probably what was in those books, it was just so ingrained in your head from the work that you had done that you had such a head start, I guess. It probably was much easier to write about those experiences than to start, just covering something from scratch.
Yeah, and I didn't keep a journal. I mean, it was, like I said, the photograph, if the photograph can bring you back, it did. It's like, I could, I'm writing this one thing about this certain photo from the Reagan administration, and I think I wrote like 3,000 words at the drop of a hat about one photo. Just remembering all the
right. I would imagine the diary aspect of things. The photo triggers the release of the memories,
and it's easy to fact check yourself these days on Google to make sure the factual stuff is accurate. Although a lot of my photographs, it's hard to Google anything about it because they were in like more or less private situations. So I have to rely totally on my memory for those.
When you're taking photos for a specific subject, what do you set out to capture? Do you have in your head like the top 3 things that you've got to nail, and that's how you start? Or is it just like an improv thing where it's just like you're there in the room, what happens, I shoot? Like it's not orchestrated.
No, it's not orchestrated. Every situation is different, though. So it's hard to, like for instance, the Oval Office. The office doesn't change.
Right.
I mean, the furniture's where the furniture is. The president sits at the desk or in the chair by the couches. The light's different because the Oval Office has these huge windows, and depending on time of day and time of year, you can get some really crazy, interesting light in there. And so I would look forward to the winter months when the sun is low on the horizon and there's no leaves on the trees, and certain times of day you'd get the streaming light, and that would be oftentimes in the back of my mind. But I'm always looking for a moment. I'm trying to think about the way I compose the picture in terms of framing it, whether who else I'm including in the picture. Am I trying to include one of the historical paintings or the bust of Martin Luther King, or am I gonna shoot him really tight? I mean, there was a time when I was fooling around shooting people's feet in the Oval Office, and we hung some of those pictures on the wall of the ground floor of the West Wing. And President Obama when he was walking to the Situation Room one day, he saw like 3 pictures in a row of people's feet, and he kind of looked at me like, what's going on here? Like,
you're not photographing my feet, Pete.
You got a foot fetish or something? It's pretty. I don't think it was even his feet. It was staff member's feet, like somebody was wearing green boots on St. Patrick's Day and things like that. So I was always looking for something different. So it would depend if it was an ordinary situation or a high stakes situation. If he's on the phone with Vladimir Putin, I'm looking for something different than if he's in a senior staff meeting that he has every day, right? I can fool around more with that. Whereas with Putin, that could be a historical photo. So I got to be, I'm looking for just a different vibe almost.
Well, you worked with Reagan and his administration. You worked with Obama. I would imagine, like you said before, you have 2 totally different subjects. You have 2 totally different eras, which I would imagine factors into things on some level. Are there moments when you were working with presidents where you enjoyed the process more, like when they were alone, when they were with their spouse or family, or pets, or working? There's so many, iconic shots. You have an iconic shot of Obama in the Situation Room with the raid on Osama bin Laden. Is it all just different to you and equal, or do you love certain types of moments when you're shooting with a president?
Well, I I love the days when the shit was hitting the fan. When I say to people, like, anything that happens in the world somehow affects the president of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
There were some really dire situations in the world that happened on his watch. And so when the shit hit the fan, that's when I was on my game.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is history. And that's when my senses were on overload,
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to everything that was going on, looking for that right expression,
Mm-hmm.
looking for the body language.
And in terms of access, I know you've like when I think it was with Obama, when you were asked to come on after you followed him for a year as a senator. You worked with him then, and you said, I have to have unfettered access. That has to be very important, because if there are crisis situations, you have to know in your job that you're going to be there, that no one's going to say, hey, Pete, get the hell out, like, not now.
And if the president wants you there, then nobody else is going to try to kick you out. Right. So he always had my back on those things. Now, a lot of it is also intuition. Like, in terms of when the shit hit the fan, that was never a problem. But, like, let's say he is going to have a sit down with a staff member, and it's not going to be a pleasant conversation for one thing or another. I got it. He didn't want to embarrass that guy, right? Or that woman. if he's going to have a hard conversation with them. And so that's when I would make a few pictures and kind of back out of the room,
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't, if you're, it's hard to believe, President Obama would chew anybody out. He didn't really chew anybody out, but if he was going to have a difficult conversation with someone, you got to give the guy some space.
Mm-hmm.
And not even really him. It's the person that is on the other end of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's something probably that person doesn't want recorded for history, in a public way.
Well, it gets recorded, but it's not like you're
Publicly,
in there
right.
for a half hour,
Right. Mm-hmm.
shooting every,
Mm-hmm.
every moment of it. The other the other situations that I looked forward to were family moments. And so with the Obamas, at least, I mean, the Reagans, the family wasn't around that much, and they were obviously older. But, Malia and Sasha were 10 and 7 when he was inaugurated. So there's this very young family, very close family. And he would always take time out to, do something with the girls. So I was always on, high alert for those moments as well.
Mm-hmm. We have some great photos of when on his first day when he became a senator, and he spent his first day with the family, and he took them around. He showed them around Washington. What I took away from them is that he speaks to his character, that he could devote that first day not to dealing with his office, but he took his kids around, and those were very touching photos.
Well, and it was also interesting to me. That was the first day I met him, and I've got this picture of him that day where he's in his little office, quickly eating a sandwich. It was like a 10-minute lunch, eating a sandwich. He's got like the sandwich in the cheek of his mouth, and Sasha's looking at the other half, wanting that other half of the sandwich. And I'm like, the only one else in the room. It's like him with the two girls, and they're, 5 feet away from me, and I'm making pictures. I mean, I'm very unobtrusive about how I go about my job, but still, I'm this new guy. He's a new politician. There's these two girls. They're just like not even paying attention to me, and especially him. And for a photojournalist, that's like the kind of subject you want. You want to capture them as they're, going about their business. And he was totally comfortable in his own skin to let me, click away.
Mm-hmm.
Very unusual.
I also love the photo of when he was announcing his candidacy for president. The shot where you see it, like on his face, you see that he's realizing in that moment that his life is never going to be the same. And Michelle, who's behind him, you see the anxiety in her face. Those kinds of photos, to me, are the absolute best. From a historic standpoint, those historical moments where you want to go, what was happening in that moment with him, with his wife, right at the time that history is about to happen,
Right. And I felt something when I made that picture. There was just a feeling that this is the moment. Like, because I had several other pictures, but when he turned and Michelle was brushing the lint off the back of his coat, and he was facing outward towards the door, getting ready to walk out. Yeah, he had this stoic look on his face. And, in retrospect, he, as you say, he was about to walk out that door and his life will never be the same. Now, it could have happened that a year and a half later, Hillary wins and his chance is gone.
Right.
And that picture wouldn't have meant as much.
Right.
But given what happened, that picture now, that's probably one of my favorite pictures I have of him, I think, in many ways.
It's a great shot because he's known for being so super cool, right? And in that shot, you see the uncertainty in his face about
Yeah.
what his next, he's literally going to take a step or two in a minute and make an announcement, a historic announcement. And you just see it. It's all over him. Like the weight of it is all over that photo. Do you know in the moment when you are either about to take a money shot or that you just took the money shot? How often does that happen?
Like many things, it depends. Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, I made several pictures on this particular photograph that we're talking about, where, he hugs, one point he hugged Malia, he hugged Sasha, he hugged Michelle, click. I'm making all those pictures, and I'm thinking all of them are moments in some ways. But then, and then I have a picture of Michelle brushing the front of his coat. But when he turned and his face changed, it became very stoic. And I think I clicked 2 frames. I knew it. I felt something, as I said, and I said, this might be the one. But I wasn't sure until, 2 or 3 hours later, when I'm going through all my pictures, and I came to this one, and I was like, yeah, this is the one. And the feeling came back that I had when I was making the photo. But sometimes you think you've got it, and then, when you look at it, something's not quite right. Maybe somebody blinked, or somebody got in the way in the background and kind of ruined it. So I guess, like I said, the answer is it depends on, situation.
Have there been moments in your career when, you pick up a camera because you think there's a shot here, and the minute you look through that lens, you're like, holy shit. And like you start to get nervous, like I've got to capture this right now. And you're terrified of losing the moment. But it's literally the moment you look through the lens, you think, oh my God, I've got magic here.
I think earlier in my career, I would get, I don't know if nervous is the right word, but I would get, flustered, flustered maybe, when, at big events. But subsequently that went away. Like, I don't think I ever felt that way during the Obama administration. I had been doing it for 30 years. Yeah, there's days when you realize, as I say, when you shit hits the fan, you're really on, you're really paying attention. But I wouldn't call it necessarily, nervousness when I was looking through the frame. Maybe a little bit with the Pope, when Pope Francis came.
I would imagine the Pope can do that to you.
Big deal, he has such an aura about him.
So you worked with 2 presidents. One was a movie star, handsome guy in that like 1950s way. Obama, who had magnetism and charisma just oozing off of him, and a $20 million smile. Do you ever think about like whether or not you were lucky to be able to photograph those guys versus like a Harry Truman or somebody who just visually wasn't as photogenic or didn't offer that kind of magnetism through the lens of a camera that your 2 subjects did?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think that Truman actually would have been an interesting character to photograph, especially, because of I just watched Oppenheimer, and it was interesting. The guy that played Truman, like, I don't know how true it was, but, he was seemed pretty tough, at least in that movie. I think the difference with Truman is there wasn't really a official White House photographer. I think there was maybe a military photographer or National Park Service photographer that would come by for ceremonial events. But, there's no pictures of Truman as he's agonizing on, whether to drop the big one, right?
Right.
I'll bet I would have liked to have been in the room during that whole crisis, because I'm sure that there's some, agonizing pictures that could have been made. So I feel super fortunate to have been in President Obama's administration. I mean, just because he's, I had that access. He was a interesting subject to photograph. We traveled a lot. He had a young family. Social media was just taken off. Instagram started in 2010. I think we started an Instagram account in 2012. So a lot of my pictures, the reason you're talking to me is because my pictures became known because a lot of them were made public during the administration, which was relatively new thing. I mean, during Reagan, we made some of our pictures from the official White House photographers public, but not a lot because it was such an ordeal to process film, make prints. You hand them to the wires send them out to their clients, whereas during Obama, we just like put them on Flickr.
Right.
And anybody can look at them. So I feel fortunate that it was kind of a different, people were seeing my pictures on a regular basis, and getting a sense of what this guy was like behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point because I would imagine if you go out on the street and ask people, name another White House photographer besides Pete Souza, that no one's going to know a name. And so I guess that's what social media and technology did. It was put you out there. But there is another reason why I wanted to talk with you today, and it's also because of the shade you threw on Trump after you left the White House. A lot of people know you for that, and you actually made a lot of people feel good because of what you did. And I do want to talk to you about that in a minute. Your documentary, which is on Amazon, and everyone should see it, it's called The Way I See It. There's a moment in there where you're with Nancy and Ron Reagan, and they're watering trees. And she is as stiff as hell. A real ice queen. It's amazing the water didn't freeze. But Ron Reagan, he starts like directing. He's like, I got a shot for you. I found that fascinating. Like, how much did that happen where he was like, no, Pete, I got a better angle for you?
It didn't happen that often, but this was, like I would go, when we were on vacation in California, I would go up to the ranch at least once a week when he was on vacation and spend the whole day with him, cutting wood, riding horses, and it was all on the fly. There was no orchestration of anything. But every once in a while, the press office would get in their head, we've got to release a photo. The press hasn't seen him for 2 weeks. They want to know he's still alive. And they'd come up with this, cockamamie idea like, let's get him watering the tree with Nancy. Because usually when he was at the ranch, he would do, the manly things like cutting wood, cutting trees, go riding. And Mrs. Reagan wouldn't necessarily participate in those. So they wanted to get something with, Mrs. Reagan in the photo. So this was the silly thing they came up with. I was sort of like, when the producers unearthed that video from the Reagan Library, I just was like embarrassed by the whole thing.
You were?
But
why?
Yeah. Because it was like, 90% of the time, or maybe higher, I was just doing pictures on the fly, how they happen. And to show this one video of, a total orchestration, it was just a little embarrassing to me.
Well, I mean, I could say as a viewer, I didn't take away from that anything negative about you in that moment.
No.
It was just so enlightening as to them as a couple, but even more so revealing about possibly what the relationship might have been like on occasion between you and him, a guy coming out of Hollywood. Like, he was around movie sets, and, movies have still photographers, and all this stuff is always staged and scripted. And I found it really fascinating that he went in like that, almost like that was his default. At the same time, she looked like that is the last place she wanted to be.
Oh yeah,
in that moment.
Exactly. She did not want to be there, for sure.
Right.
I get it. It's like,
but it spoke to about like your job, like, as a White House photographer. Like, there were moments clearly with him and his wife, I guess, and also probably even with the Obamas, where there were some challenges in being able to do your job in a moment, in a particular shoot, the way you wanted to. Maybe less with Obama. I would imagine it was probably more with those two. But it was just very revealing, and I would imagine that it was very, very different for you to work in that administration versus Obama.
For sure. And Nancy Reagan had nothing to do with policy, but she had everything to do with how he was being portrayed. And how, people were, staff was supporting him to help him and not themselves. Look, anytime somebody gets power, staff people, there's always somebody who's in it just for themselves and not for the, and Nancy had a good sense of who those people were, much more than he did. And I, you saw me interacting with Mrs. Reagan, trying to not piss her off and make her, comfortable. That was probably fairly early on in my tenure there. I had a good relationship with her. I really did. Enough so that when President Reagan died, she asked me to, be the official photographer for the funeral.
Yeah, your photos of the funeral are heartbreaking. The one where she's completely, utterly distraught with Ron Jr. and the daughter comforting her. I mean, I actually wept during the documentary when those photos came up, because you just saw her as a woman. You saw her as somebody grieving, and you encapsulated that moment so perfectly. And clearly you had
and that was such a intimate moment that, I hadn't been around her on a regular basis for 15 years. Right. He left in 89. This was 2004. I think that's 15 years. And so when she came back on Air Force One and knelt down in front of the casket, I didn't know how she would feel about me making this picture. I kind of looked at her, and I don't know that she really looked at me, but I think I know her look. I think if she really didn't want me there, she would have given me a look, and she didn't. So I felt that I needed to make that picture, that it was important for history, and it was important for her personally, I think, too. She loved this man. They were partners. They were each other's best friends. It was not fake in any way. And I think you see it in that picture.
Yeah, I would imagine when people go into politics and they achieve success on that kind of a level, they understand that part of the job, what goes with the territory, is you lose your private life in a way. And those moments, like, I mean, I had a spouse die. I wouldn't want anybody sticking a camera in my face doing it. But if I was at that level in government and everything I did mattered on a day-to-day basis and for historical purposes, I would imagine that they get to a point where they understand all that. Like, it's just that's part of their sacrifice, you know?
It's part of it. That's part of it. It is, you know. I don't know that Trump ever understood that, but
No, and I was going to say that I think it's more of the old days where politics and politicians operated differently with a different set of rules than Trump, you know?
yeah.
I would imagine Trump wouldn't have any issue telling a photographer to get the fuck out of my office. You know, like it just,
Right.
the rules and the decorum and all that, protocol, history means nothing. I mean, to Trump, history means nothing. How much do you think photographs shape a narrative? So, for example, the Nancy Reagan stuff. The way you shoot someone, can it change the way people, and should it change the way people view someone if it's done the right way? How much power do you have as a photographer to shape a narrative?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've heard people say that they learned a lot about Barack Obama from my photographs. But I think it's hard for me to judge. What I always try to do is present authentic photographs. This is who he is. It's easy to portray someone differently than they really are. Like, okay, here's for instance, for instance, the last couple of months, there's been a lot of stories about Joe Biden being too old. And oftentimes the newspapers, magazines are using file photos. It's not like a photo, you know, a live photo like from today. It's going back in time and trying to find a picture that matches the theme of the story, which is very dangerous because you're editorializing,
right,
in a very profound way. Same with a lot of Trump's lawsuits. Obviously, in the courtroom's different, but when there's some new breaking story about January 6th or whatever like that, and Trump doesn't come out and make any statement, newspapers use a file photo, and they are editorializing in the photo that they choose to use with the story, depending on what the story says. That, again, to me is dangerous. So what I always tried to do is, if we were going to make a picture public, then it was going to be an authentic photograph, and it was going to have a AP style caption on, "This is the president doing this." Now later, if somebody uses that out of context, there's nothing we can do about it. But we've set the ground that this is authentic photograph from this event. This is what was going on. He's agonizing over the recession, you know, and that's what the photograph depicts. If the GOP later uses it in a campaign ad against him in a different context, there's nothing we can do about it. But we've set, you know, the authenticity of what this photograph represents.
So I want to. That makes total sense, and I want to ask you. I just want to riff on that for a bit because you brought up Biden's age, which is an issue for him, and I brought up the subject of shaping a narrative. If you were in the White House right now as photographer, are there photographs that you would suggest or try to take that sort of refute this whole business that he's too old, that he's unfit, that he's out of shape, that he's this, he's that? Are there things they should be doing?
Yes. I'm going to get myself into trouble here because Adam Schultz, Biden's photographer, is a good photographer. He's getting good pictures. They are not making those public. I mean, what I mean by that is it's seemingly every picture that you see that they post on Instagram and social media, Facebook, is Joe Biden smiling. Come on, man. Like, okay, they did something interesting with him preparing for the State of the Union. I didn't like all the video that they interspersed, but at least they had tried to use, some of Eric's work. I want to see Joe Biden at work.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to be smiling in every freaking picture.
How about him shooting a basket? How about him doing a push-up? How about something?
I think they are doing a disservice.
Yeah, I agree.
I really do. And somebody hears this at the White House, it's probably somebody I know, and they're going to be pissed off at me. But I just don't understand it. I mean, Joe Biden is a very personable guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know how he interacts with people. I want to see more of that. I don't want to just see a picture of him doing a selfie with somebody.
Yeah, no.
How many of those pictures do they post?
I think they could shape a narrative.
And it's not a criticism. Just so that I'm crystal clear, I am not criticizing the White House photographer because I actually think he's doing a great job. I'm criticizing whoever it is that decides which pictures get made public. That I think they're off for some reason.
Yeah. No, I've been saying for months they should do an ad where he's just, for like a minute, you see him doing like a few seconds of a push-up, a few seconds of shooting a basket, maybe even with Obama, a few seconds on a bicycle, a few seconds doing something else. And then he just goes, hey, too old?
But what they do is when they try to do some things like that, they force it. It's like, why not just whatever happens, capture that, and that's what you make public.
Right.
I mean, that's what.
Well, that's different from an ad. I mean, an ad is all forced. It's all created. So they have to, there's a script. They have to, when
no,
create
it's not. It's not true. It's not true. There were a lot of Obama ads that were done that were from situations that I had photographed, throughout his presidency, and they would just pull them out. So, but they weren't like having me, let's go shoot this, let's go shoot that.
Yeah.
That's not the way we did
I mean, just as a layman on the street, a voter, I think somehow they need to get in front of that age thing to show that he's fit.
Well,
and,
I mean,
he is a fit guy.
Look, he's not the. I mean, he gave a great speech last night. He flubbed a few lines. That's Joe Biden. He was like that when he was 29 years old. The same thing. The thing that I was impressive is how long he stayed after the speech.
Yes, almost an hour.
Interacted with members of Congress.
And all the Republicans left.
And was energetic about it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's just crazy that, it's too old is just a word. Those are two words. The reality of it is that he's incredibly fit. The things that he does is amazing. In our last couple of minutes, I want to mention a couple of photos that I think were just incredibly iconic. Stuff during the 2009 financial crisis. In particular, the photo where Obama is just looking up at JFK with his arms, JFK with his arms crossed. Unbelievable. The Reggie Love photo. Obama's shooting the basket with Reggie Love.
Yeah, he was playing one-on-one with Reggie and blocked Reggie's shot. Reggie's 6'6", was, 25 years younger, played on Duke, the basketball team when they won a national championship. So Reggie was a good player. But Obama blocked his shot. And, of course, after they finished, he wanted to know if I had gotten it. It was like the one and only time I showed him the picture on the back of the camera,
It's a great shot. And the last thing I want to ask you about is the shade that you dropped or threw. I know those are words that you had never heard before at the time, but you sort of were a pretty obscure guy. You're not in the public eye. You didn't speak out, but something triggered in you when Trump became president, and you started with a photo of Obama sitting on the edge of his desk with the red shades drapes behind it, and you put that out on Instagram, and you said something like, I was happier with the old shades. What do you think? And that started this path for you, which was unbelievable, because to me and millions and millions of other people who are living in this world of, oh my God, how is this guy president? What are we going to do? There were people like you and like Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live who each week, each day gave us something that made us feel like, okay, okay, there are still real sane people in this world, and we're going to get through this. And I don't know if you, maybe I'm not the first person to tell you this, but it meant so much to people that you did that. What made you decide to do that?
How could I not? I mean, I was in disbelief that he got elected. I don't think he's a good person. I don't think he's respected the presidency. I think he only thought about one thing, and that was himself. He really didn't give a shit about even the people that voted for him. You know, he says he does, but he doesn't. His policies show that. And, you know, he just lies about everything. And I was just disgusted. I had essentially was no longer a working photojournalist. I'm a private citizen. I thought I had a unique perspective, having worked for, you know, arguably the most popular Republican president of my generation and the most popular Democratic president of my generation, so that I could come at it. So it was not totally partisan. It was, this guy does not deserve to be in the Oval Office. And, you know, all I had to do was take whatever tweet he put out, and that would inspire a photograph and a caption. And that first year, 2017, I never said what I was referring to.
Right.
Like, if you weren't following the news, you might not get it. You might not get my caption.
Right.
But people, they got it.
Yeah, no, the not so subtle aspect to it was utterly delicious for the people who understood it. Because you're right, you didn't name names, you didn't name situations. You just saw the bad guy doing something, and then you showed us what it looks like when the good guy does something. And that was kind of brilliant, and it just felt great to see those things. Did it feel as great to you? Like, did you feel a compulsion to do it because you hated Trump, blah, 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 or did it actually really feel good? Like, when you did, you were like, yeah, that's awesome.
No, it felt like if he said something really outrageous, it felt good to be able to respond and have people appreciate my humor and sarcasm and really feel like, I don't know, that there was a time when we didn't feel like this about our president, you know, because like it was like almost every day there was crazy shit that he was saying or doing. And it's like, you sort of like, you become numb to it after a while.
Yeah. Well,
I didn't want people to become numb to it. You know, this is not right.
Well, you have been very generous with your time. I literally could sit here for hours talking to you. I do hope you'll come back and continue the conversation. Nothing personal, but I hope I never have to see you shade Trump again. So I'm just putting that out there. I'd love to see your work in other ways. And speaking of your other work, you have books. I want to just tell people, 2008, The Rise of Barack Obama. 2017, Obama, An Intimate Portrait. 2018, Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents. 2022, The West Wing and Beyond, What I Saw Inside the Presidency. And then you've got a bunch of books before that. But they're all great. They're all beautiful. They all capture these incredible historic moments, and people should go out and get at least one or more of them. And so, again, Pete, thanks for coming on. I do appreciate it, and I do hope you'll come back.
You bet. Great to talk to you, and I enjoyed it very much.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.